being the Kohen. So doing the avoda means being the Kohen. So I just want to spend a minute or two talking about the evolution of the history of the kahuna and just broadly. So first of all, so the story of kahuna that we have, right? We have the Kohanim or the Bnei Aaron that come from Shevet Levi, and we're gonna start from Adam. So we said, yes, last time that we met that Adam Arishon was one way to look at Adam in Gan Eden was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him a place where he was put la'avda u'lashamra so an element of his role is service, avoda, and he is the Adam HaMetukan, who is he is a result of a process that starts off with Naaseh Adam, that he incorporates in him all the various elements and different levels of chiyus, of vitality in reality, and in him relating directly to God, all the elements of the Bria are relating through him. He's essentially the Shliach Tzibur, and he is the Kohen, and he's uniting all the forces in creation through himself and focusing them towards his relationship with Hashem, or elevating them within his, directing them in the service of Hashem. So Adam Rishon is perceived, if we want to take that way of looking at Adam Rishon, that becomes then ultimately the Kahuna. According to the Shla Kodesh says that Aaron eventually represents the Adam HaMetukan in this sense, who's responsible for the Avodah. So historically, in Sefer Bereshis, the first Kohen that I know of that we have is Malki Tzedek, who is Shem. And Chazal say that Avram Avinu, after the war of the four kings of the five kings, he meets Malki Tzedek, and Malki Tzedek comes and he brings him lechem v'yayin, and he gives him meiser. And Chazal say he gives him meiser because he's the Kohen. Why is he the Kohen? How did he earn the Kahuna? Because Malki Tzedek said he blessed Abraham and then he blessed God. And since he put the servant before the master, so Avram Avinu was seen as more fitting now to take the baton. That's one way of reading. That's how Chazal see it. Malki Tzedek knowingly is passing over the baton. He's recognizing maybe that Avram Avinu is more ra'oi for this. But anyway, Avraham gets the schutz of kahuna from Malki Tzedek. And and that's passed on from his children. And we talked about last time how Avram Avinu at the Akedah, he says that that place should be Bahar Hashem Yera'eh, that there should be a Beit HaMikdash, and that his, in the schus of that, maybe that his children should be responsible for the avodah in the Beit HaMikdash, which is the consolidation of Hashem's malchus in the world, and this world fulfilling that tafkid of Adam Arishon. So Bahar Hashem Yera'eh, and Avram Avinu being empowered with the Kahuna, so that goes to his children then in the Beit HaMikdash. The first Kohen, well, initially, there was supposed to be the Bechor. We know that Kedushas Yisrael is represented in Yetzias Mitzrayim, the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, through the story of the Bechor and B'ni Bechori Yisrael, and the whole. We represent the idea that since the firstborn is sanctified, that we're sanctified, we're the first ones, so to speak, that are considered HaKadosh Baruch Hu's own children, and the Bechor was meant to embody this in the service in the Beis HaMikdash. At Har Sinai, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe that the proposal to marry Am Yisrael, the chuppah of Har Sinai, is Vatem tiyu li mamleches kohanim v'goy kadosh, right? That there should be an Am Segula and a mamleches kohanim. So that means that we're seen as a kingdom of priests. We're there to facilitate on behalf of all of humanity this service. We're responsible for the regular service, and if anybody else comes to serve God, right, we say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu perceives as this Beis HaMikdash as ultimately being a Beis Tefilla Yikareh L'chol Ha'amim, and a goy is welcome to bring a certain type of karban, a very specific ola offering. But basically, the Bechor, which was an embodiment of the Kedushas Yisrael, and how this ultimately the avoda is the bearer, that Am Yisrael is the bearer of the legacy of this avoda. Okay, so now Yisrael, as an aside, or to bring the point home of what a Kohen is, Yisrael is called Kohen Midya. and everybody knows why he's called Kohen Midian, but the Torah doesn't let up even after he shows up in in Parshas Yisrael, and after he hears about Kriyas Yamsuf and Milchemes Amalek, and he comes to Matan Torah. It still calls him. It calls him. It says in the beginning, in the opening words of Parshas Yisrael, it says Kohen Midian, Chosem Moshe, Kohen Midian. Why do you have to call him Kohen Midian? But it's really a huge shvach that he was a Kohen. Why was he called a Kohen? He wasn't a Kohen of a particular uh, um, Avodah Zarah. He was a Kohen of any Avodah Zarah that he found. There are Goyim Kohanim mentioned in Shemos. You have Potiphar, who was Kohen On, and you have the Kohanim in Mitzrayim that are mentioned. So why is Yisro called a Kohen? What drove Yisro? Yisro, when he came of age, he knew that the highest calling a human being could have is to serve God. He just didn't know who God was. He said, I'm going to find God, because the highest thing that a human being can do is serve God. So he went looking. It doesn't matter, he went till he found it, till he got a dead end, and then he moved on, and he said, I'm going to find the true God. And he didn't have the same character arc or trajectory that Avram Avinu had, but when he saw the real one, he was overjoyed. So this is a noteworthy thing that we give credit to Yisro to represent, meaning he was keyed into this. So there has to be an understanding here of basic Adam, that the highest thing that Adam could be is a Kohen. So that's an important point. Okay, so now the Kohanim, it's not just that the Chazal say, Kohanim ochlim v'abaylim miskaprim, that part of the process of a carbon that's brought for kapara, a carbon chatas. So there are certain carbonos that there are parts that go on the mizbeach. There are certain carbonos like an olah that are entirely burnt. There are the carbonos that parts go on the mizbeach. That means that other parts are eaten, and those parts that are eaten by the kohen. If it's carbon shlamim, then the person who brings the carbon can also eats from it. But if it's carbon chatas or carbon asham, the kohen eats it, and that's kind of like the act of. It's not just that the mizbeach is a shulchan gavoa and the fire burns it, and it's like shamayim consumes it, or the eish goes up and it gives a reach nichoach. But the kohanim actually consume it, and they transform it in a physical process into nutrients that turn into blood and cells, and it lives on in their body, and they've upgraded that. That animal that had a certain level of chiyus before it was killed, not only has been sanctified, but it gets incorporated into a human body in the most holy type of eating there is. And Chazal say, Kohanim ochlim v'abaylim miskaprim. So the Kohen is part of the avoda. And the Chazal say also, while we mention that a person's shulchan today is a mizbeach. It's their mizbeach kapara. The Gemara says that that's because we use our table to provide for hachnosas orchim and chasadim to feed people. But it's also because we celebrate, we have holy su'udas, etc. But the tzaddikim say, in Chassidus, they say that the achila of the tzaddik is mamish like hakravas karba. And to eat from the shirayim of a tzaddik is, meaning there's something even in the act of achila itself, that a human being can be so refined that they are the mizbeach and they are the eish. And so there's something in the act of carbon that's emphasizing over there, that you're incorporating and uplifting the essence that's invested in this, the chiyus, the spiritual chiyus, and this physical property is being consumed and assimilated into the one who's eating it for a higher purpose. That's the kahuna, and he's facilitating that. So okay, so that's a little bit about kahuna. Okay, so let's get to karbanos. Okay, so I have here the Rambam, and we're gonna maybe do Perek of Ma'aser Karbanos, where he covers the basics and the generals. Maybe I'll talk about a little bit first, and we'll talk about some other things. And then I thought maybe, the fifth parak of Maseches Zvachim, which is a parak of Mishnayos that's said every day in Shachris. It's the part of Karbanos that's said every day. It's interesting, the Karbanos, hopefully we'll have a session where we can talk about how this all translates into Tefilla. But the Tefilla itself, which is makom Karbanos, also has a section which is the Karbanos. And Chazal say that nowadays that we don't have Karbanos, so what should we do? So Hashem says, learn the halachos, the Torah of the Ola, learn the Torah of the Chatas, and Mala Ani Alechem, right? HaKadosh Baruch will consider it as if we brought it. So learning the halachos is like, it's mamish, Hashem considers it doing it. So, and that's one reason why we would have it in the structure of our tefillah, because the whole reason why we have a tefillah, one of the Chazal say that the tefillah we have is established according to the Avos, meaning Avram Avinu established Shachris, Yitzchak Mincha, and Yaakov Mariv, but it also says that they were connected the Karbanos. So when we didn't have Karbanos, the instituted tefillah that the Anshe Knesset Hagedolah gave us is Shachris and Mincha according to the Tamid of Shachris, which was the Ola that's brought every day in the morning, and the Tamid Shel Ben Harbayim, which is the Mincha. We call it Mincha, but that's the tefillas that we have are in lieu of karbanos. So it makes sense just on that level why we would incorporate in the beginning of tefillah before Psukei de Zimra, why we talk about the karbanos, but also the karbanos themselves. Okay, so that has to do with the structure of tefillah. The karbanos are in the olam hamaisa, and there's a whole the Kabbalistic way of going through the tefillah is that the successive sections, till you arrive at the Amida, are going through the various worlds, and we're starting with the olam hamaisa, and the karbanos are really where the rubber meets the road, where we're incorporating the physical and we're interacting with the physical, and it's a physical right, and you have to have technically things have to be correct in order for the biggest spiritual things to happen. So Karbanos, okay, so the first thing you got to know is that the Karbanos have prescribed times. Okay, so there is an Isser Pigul. The Isser Pigul means that a Kohen is not allowed to have a machshava, meaning that on the level of kavana of what happens with a karban, when you bring a karban, you have to have in mind when it's shechted, if it's an animal karban, that it will be eaten in the right time in the right place. Meaning, if it's kadshe kedoshim, it cannot be eaten out of the meat can't go out of the azara, and every particular karban has a prescribed amount of time that you can eat it, a day and a night, 2 days, 2 nights, etc. So the pigul means that there's an isser that the Kohen, when he's shechting it or he's bringing it on the Mizbeach, he can't have in mind that he's going to eat what he has to eat outside of the prescribed time, or he's going to put on the Mizbeach outside the prescribed time. That kavana is an isser, and it apostles the animal, and then any following through with that is an isser. If you eat from it, or if you bring it, meaning it's possible. Okay, now I just remembered that the reason why I was talking about karbanos, I'm sorry, I distracted myself. The karbanos in the tefillah, the feature of the karbanos that we say is the perek, the fifth perek in Maseches Zvachim, called Ezo Mekoman. Ezo Mekoman is the only perek in Shas that doesn't have any machlokas mentioned in it, and we say it in davening, and it goes through basically the procedure for all the zvachim, all the karbanos that come from animals that are shechted, generally, and hopefully we'll go through some of that just to give you a taste of procedure. Okay, so that's what I meant to say. Okay, so there's an isser of pigo. Okay, there's another halacha called nosar, that you cannot leave a karban that has a prescribed time. You cannot leave it. You cannot wait to eat it after its prescribed time, and you can't leave it uneaten. You can't eat it afterwards, and you have to eat it beforehand. And if it is left over, then you have to burn it. Okay, so those are important dinim in karbanos when it comes to zvachim, which is animal sacrifices, pigul and nosar. Okay, so now we're going to take a look here. Let's go over some basic stuff. Okay, so There's zvachim and there's menachos. Zvachim are karbanos that are brought from animals, and menachos are brought from the tzomeach, usually from the flour. And we're going to talk about the procedure that of zvachim, and we're going to talk about the procedure of menachos. But generally speaking, zvachim, there's four. We're going to talk about the different types of animals that Zvachim come from. And then there's something called Avodas Hadam. Zvachim have something called Avodas Hadam, which means the blood services. And that's four steps that, and everything that makes a animal kosher, or the avoda kosher for that karban, happens in those four steps. And anything afterwards doesn't mess up the karban. We're going to talk about that. And then menachos have a very, very short general procedure.
Rabbi, is it possible you could move your video so we could see your whole face?
Oh, I'm sorry. I have no idea what I want to have you just tell me what's good. Is this better or worse?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so menachos are when you bring for various karbanos that bring flour. So basically there's two types generally. There's two categories of karbanos. There's karbanos tzibur, which are commandments on the community to bring, and there's a karbanos yachid, which are individuals have to bring based on their individual circumstance. Okay, so of the karbanos tzibur, to give you an example of what menachos would be, what are the sacrifices that are brought out of flour? So you have, first of all, the lechem apanim is not a traditional sacrifice. It's not brought on the mizbeach. It's 12 the showbreads that sit on the shulchan, and they're eaten by the kohanim from week to week. But they're made out of wheat. They're made out of wheat flour. There's the karban of the omer that we bring starting the second day of Pesach, right? And we bring it till Shavuot, and that's a karban tzibur, and that's a measure of flour, okay, that's soaked in oil, okay? Then there's the shtei halechem. The shtei halechem is a special karban that's brought only on Shavuos, which are these two breads, and they are also made out of chita. Now, it's interesting. There's no chametz. None of this is ever chametz, except for the shtei halechem. Okay, it's very interesting. And then you have something, a karban yachid, which would be an example of a mincha, is a mincha sota. Somebody who is a sota, who's going through the rigmarole of exonerating herself with the whole rite of the sota. One of the things she does is she brings a minchas seora, which is actually, I believe it's the only mincha that one brings that's made out of barley. Everything else is made out of wheat. So that's an example of menachos. Now, what happens? The Kohen, however, let's say somebody wants to donate a mincha. So somebody will donate a certain amount of flour, and the Kohen will prepare that. Sometimes there are specific karbanos that the mincha is prescribed to be prepared in certain ways. There's lechem, there's matzah, there's kikar, there's all different kinds of recipes and forms of what they would cook it. And then what they would do is there's a machlokas tanaim if this step happened. There's something called pisisa or petita, which means that of the things that were baked or prepared, they would shred a certain amount in a certain way. They would make pieces. And then here's the main thing. The main thing is that the Kohen does kamitza. Kamitza means he takes a scoop from his hand, I believe his right hand, and his middle three fingers, whatever it holds, that's what goes on the mizbeach. And then everything else is eaten by the Kohen. Okay, so that's basically the basic procedure of a mincha. Okay, now a zebach is as follows. Before we we're going to talk about categories and stuff, but I just want you to bear in mind the basic procedure for all animal karbanos. So first of all, the animal has to be shechted. Now, this does not necessarily have to be done technically by a kohen. Shchita bezor is kosher. That means you can have a non-kohen on the floor in the Beis HaMikdash doing the shchita. Okay, once it's slaughtered, there's something called kabbalat hadam. That means that a special kli called a kli sharet, which means a kli, a vessel that has been sanctified for this use, and there are standards for klishares. Every aspect of what we're going to talk about has a world of its own halachot. Okay, so the Kohen has to catch the blood that comes out from the shechita in this vessel, and that's called kabbalat adam. Then there's something called holacha, where he has to take it, or halicha, where he has to take this blood to the mizbeach. And then there's something called the matnat damim, the matanot. And that's, depending on the carbon, there will be a certain amount of sprinkles or blood placed, depending on the carbon, in different locations. And that is basically the avodat hadam. Then, depending on the carbon, there's certain parts of it which will go on the mizbeach, and certain parts of it will be eaten by the Kohen. And depending on the carbon, certain parts of it can be eaten by the person who brought the carbon and whoever else he wants to party with. Okay, so that's basically it's the shechita, the kabbalah, the halicha, and the matnat damim, which we call the zrika, throwing. Okay, so when we look in the Mishnayos, we're going to see a description of these things in various contexts. Okay, so now I'm going to read to you a little bit. Well, we're going to do a seker first before we get to the Rambam. I have a list of things here. Okay, so first of all, when it comes to zvachim, the following animals are brought. Okay, there are 5 types of animals that are kosher for karbanos. You have bakar, which are ox. You have kvasim, sheep. Izim, goats. Torim, which are a type of bird. And bnei yonah, turtle doves, another type of bird. I do not know the difference between torim and a bnei yonah. Uh, biologically. But so those are birds, and so we're not saying which karbanos are brought from which. We're just saying those are the things you bring. You can't bring a turkey, and you can't bring, I don't know. Those are pretty much the kosher animals. You can't bring a fish. Now they also have ages. There are ages of, meaning there's a minimum age and a maximum age. And when the Torah describes a particular carbon and it says a particular animal what to bring, sometimes it'll signal how old it is, and sometimes it won't, and we know how old it's meant to be. So, okay, so there's, first of all, there's 4 types, 4 categories of karbanos. There's something called an ola, which is a burnt offering. That means the entire animal is consumed on the mizbeach. There's a chatas, a sin offering. There's an asham. There's 2 types of ashamos. Literally, it means a guilt offering. There's ashamos that are, let's say, like an asham nazir. A nazir brings an asham, I guess, but then that's a chatas that a nazir would bring, but we call it an asham. And then there's something called an asham talui, which means that somebody became aware that there's a possibility that he did a certain type of sin, but he doesn't know for sure. So he has to bring an asham, but it's called an asham talui. The Torah prescribes it in the event, even though he doesn't know, he brings that carbon, but the carbon is called the conditional carbon. So that's an asham. And then there's something called the shlamim. Okay? Now the first 3, the ola, the chatas, and the asham, they're in a category called kodshe kedoshim. And the shlamim is in a category called kodshe kalim. One of the differences between kodshe kodshim and kodshe kalim is that kodshe kodshim has to be, once the animal's shechted, no part of it is allowed to leave the azara of the Beis Hamikdash. Kodshe kalim, like a shlamim, if you bring a carbon shlamim, you can eat that in Yerushalayim, but I don't believe you have to be in the azara to eat it. Okay, so now each one of these are just the types of carbonos, but there are many different types within types. Okay, there's something called a carbon tzibor and a carbon yachid. So, for example, you can have a burnt offering that's a personal individual offering. Somebody who has to bring an asham, or an ola, or you can have a carbon tzibor, which is an ola. Okay, so an ola just describes a certain laws that pertain to it, but it doesn't tell you why it's being brought. Okay. Um, Okay, so now there's some carbonates that come with wine and mincha solas. That means a flour that's soaked in oil, and that's something that comes with the carbon, depending on what it is. And obviously, the animals themselves have standards. Any animal that you bring has to have certain standards of what it means, that it doesn't have a blemish that would make it not good enough to go on the mizbeach. Okay, so now, like we said, there are prescribed times, and there's the isser of pigol that you can't have in mind when you shecht it or you bring it on the mizbeach, that it's going to be eaten or brought outside of its time. Okay, so now what other kinds of kavanos do we have to have what is there a minimum of kavana that we have to have when bringing a carbon? Okay, so there's 6 things that you have to have in mind when you bring the carbon. One is l'shem hazevach. That means that you have to have in mind that if it's a carbon chatas, that you're bringing it as a carbon chatas. Okay. The second thing is l'shem hazovech, that you're doing it on behalf of the person who has to bring it. Number 3 is lizboach la Hashem baruch hu, that you're conscious that you're bringing this to Hashem. Okay. Okay. So you have to have in mind that it should be l'reach bilvad, shahaktarasa l'reach bilvad, that the only that the purpose of bringing it is for the reach, and that this reach should bring nachas ruach to Hashem. Okay, and this is the kavana that one has to have with all procedures with all stations of the avodas carbon. Meaning, this is not just at the moment that you shecht it, but this is to constantly have this in mind. Fascinating. There's a whole discussion. The first sugya in Masechet Zvachim is all about how much you have to have in mind when you bring the carbon. And the Gemara says that the person who brings the carbon, it's best not to have anything in mind, meaning not the person, not the Kohen, but the person let's say a person who's responsible for a chatas, who's giving it to the Kohen, it's best that a person doesn't have anything in mind in regards to these kinds of things, and to just have in mind that it should be according to these standards and halachas that it's meant to be. Because we're concerned that if the average person started to try to have kavana, he would have all kinds of kavanas that may invalidate it. So that's an interesting point that the Gemara brings in the beginning of Zvachim. But here we're saying, obviously, if it's service, you need to have in mind specifically, there should be default in the back of your head, a conscious, not a subconscious, but a conscious thought that this is for the right reasons, and it's for the appropriate thoughts and the appropriate intentions. Okay, so we talked about the shchita and the kabbalat adam and the zrika. Okay, now after that happens, so after the sprinkling is done at the right places, so then the animal has to be, there's something called hefshet v'nituach. And that means that the hide is skinned, right? The animal's skinned, and it's butchered to the appropriate pieces. And then, there's a whole parak in Yuma, if anybody wants to know, that talks about the different karbanot, how many kohanim it took to carry in every special day that there was, meaning of the different types of karbanos, each karban, how many kohanim it took to bring that karban based on how many kohanim held how many pieces that they would cut up into this many pieces, and this is the order that it would go up. So there's specific orders. There's a machloket tanaim about how the pieces go up that are butchered. Does it go up in a certain prescribed order, one particular order, or does it go rather the way the animal would walk if it was alive, how the procession would be? So this is a sugya that you could look up if you like in Yuma. So that's they skin the animal and they cut it up. If it's and then if it's an ola, it's obviously it's not eaten at all, and the whole thing is consumed on the fire. Let's see, the chatas. Okay, there's two types of karban chatas. So there's the parts that go on the mizbech are called imurim, and the rest of the meat is eaten by the kohen, and it has to be eaten in the hazara, and it has to be male kohanim. And that those are chatos that are eaten, but then there are chatos that are burnt in their entirety. And so only the emurim that are go on the mizbeach, they are not olas. The pieces that don't go on the mizbeach go somewhere else to be burnt. So there was a place in the Beis Hamikdash called the Trumas Hadeshem, and that's basically it's kind of on site, but like outside of the Beis Hamikdash, where they would basically burn everything that couldn't be used or had to be burnt. Okay, so let's look in the Rambam and see if there's anything that we didn't cover yet before we go into the Mishnayos. That okay, so there. Okay, the Rambam says that we said that there's four different types of karbanot. There's ola, a chatas, an asham, and a shlamim. Okay, there are also three other kinds of a karban yachid, and those are called the karban pesach, the bechar, and the maaser. The karban pesach, we know what that is. The bechar is a karban that you would bring for peter. I'm sorry, for Bachar, Kedushas Bachar, meaning every animal that would be born to somebody from their livestock. The firstborn animal has Kedushas Bachar. And Meiser. Meiser would be, let's say, Meiser Behema. So in a year, in a season, after 10 animals that are born to somebody from their livestock, afterwards, one for 1/10, one for every 10 goes to the Mikdash. Okay. Kol karbanos hatzibur hein ola ochatos. So when it comes to the karbanot tzibur, that means the collective karbanos of the tzibur that are mentioned in the Torah, they're only either olas or chatas. Ve'ein bekarbanot hatzibur shlamim chutz mishnei kvasim habayim im lechem hatnufa batzeres. Okay, the category of shlamim, the only type of shlamim that is ever a karban tzibur, is the two lambs that we bring on Shavuos together with the shtei halechem, the two breads that we mentioned. Vehem hanikram zivchei shalmei tzibur. They are called the zivchei shalmei tzibur, the shlamim of the tzibur. Ve'ein hatzibur makriven asham olam velo of. They'll never have a karban from the tzibur where they bring a bird, or there's no such thing as an asham that has the laws of an asham that's brought on behalf of the tzibur. Okay. What are the karbanot tzibur? They are the two tamidim that we mentioned that come every single day. Okay, that's the tamid. Sorry, the tamid of the morning and the tamid of the afternoon. Umusafe Shabbatot v'Rashei Chadashim. So on the special days that are commemorations, right? Special days between God and Am Yisrael. So we have special karbanot that are called the Musafim, and those Musafim of Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh and the Moadot, those are karbanot tzibur. They conform to the laws of the karbanos of the tzibur and the seer. Okay, so on Yom Kippur, there's a lot of special karbanot that come on Yom Kippur, but the seer chata. So there's the two goats, the twin goats, and there's a lottery, and one of them gets kicked off of a cliff, and the other one goes on the mizbeach, and that's the seer chatas, and that's a karban tzibur. Okay, and so now there's if all of the tzibur, if the collective did a sin by accident, because of a ruling from Beit Din, from a central Beit Din, that there was some sort of mistake that the Sanhedrin made, and they paskin that people should do things, and it was really an iser karet, and they found out afterwards. So then there is a special karban tzibur that they bring. I'm sorry, if they mistakenly ruled specifically avodah zara, okay, and everybody ended up, or people did avodah zara because of this ruling from Sanhedrin. So then there's a karban, a special karban that they bring. Every shevet has to bring their own karban, and it consists of a par. There's one par and one seir. There's one ox or one male. We don't call them cows, right? We call them a bull, and seir, a goat. Okay, that's a karban sibra. That's a chatas. And I'm sorry, the seir is a chatas, the goat is a chatas, and the par is an ola. Okay. Now there are seirim that are called seirei avodah zara. There are goats that are brought if a person, so if Beis Din accidentally made a ruling. So I'm sorry. So that's called a seirei avodah zara. That if Beis Din made an incorrect ruling, and everybody because of that they end up doing avodah zara. So there's a collective karban where they bring this goat. Okay. Now, if they just made a mistaken ruling about any iser kares, so that's called. Then everybody brings a par lechatas, right? They don't bring the ola, and that's called a par hel and davar, that something was obscured from Beit Din. They made a mistake. So that's called a par hel and davar. And that's, the tzibur brings that. Okay. So what are some examples of a karbanot yachid? So we mentioned the bechor and the meiser and the pesach. And there's something called the karban chagiga, which every individual male has to bring on the Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. That's the Shalosh Regalim. And that's a karban shlamim. And we said that a shlamim, that means that the Baal gets to eat portions of it, and also that it's kadshe kalim, which means it does not have to be eaten in the azara. Okay, and the male that brings a karban shlamim, he also has to bring an olat re'iyah on these three festivals. That means a burnt offering. It's an olah. Okay, a ger, somebody who converts to Am Yisrael, they have to bring a karban, and that's an olah, and it comes from a behema. Or it can come from two bnei Yonah, or shtei torim. I guess depending on what he can afford. But if he brings the birds, they're both of them, they're olas. He can also bring two animals, two behemot, which one would be an olah and one would be a shlamim, and somebody who voluntarily wants to bring a karban. So there's two types of voluntary karbanot, halachically speaking. There's something called the neder, which is a vow, and there's something called the nedava, which is a donation. What's the difference? A neder is when somebody says, I'm taking upon myself to bring a particular karban or a karban to the Beit HaMikdash. So he has an obligation to bring that karban. That obligation is on him. A nedava is if somebody had something on hand that he wants to pledge to the Beit HaMikdash. So for example, I have a blue ribbon animal that just won a prize at the fair, and I say, hey, I want to bring this animal to the Beis HaMikdash. So that's called a nedava. What's the difference? The neder, like we said, is on me. I took responsibility for that. So if I have an animal earmarked for a neder and something happens to that animal, I have to provide another animal because the obligation is on me. I have to bring the karban. But in the case with Betsy, right, where the blue ribbon cow, I said that this is the one. So if anything happens to this cow that invalidates her, or I'm incapable of bringing her, I don't have to. So my nedava has been taken off. So those are the two ways that a person would voluntarily bring a karban. So regarding a neder or nedava for an ola or a shlamim, you can promise an ola or a shlamim. The shlamim comes with something called lechem, which is not chametz, and those are called the lachmei toda. And also a Nazir, it brings a Karban Yachid. A Nazir brings upon completion of his vow of Nazirus, um, he brings a particular Karban, and there's a special Karban for a Nazir who doesn't make it through all the way and he accidentally becomes Tameh. So he has to, he has to start over again. He brings a different kind of Karban in that event. But anyway, so the Karbanos of a Nazir, those are an Ola and a Chatas and a Shlomim and a Mitzora, somebody who has been purified from leprosy, not leprosy, but saras, right? They also bring a Karban upon completing their purification process, and they bring a Chatas and an Asham and an Ola. Okay, and a Zav or a Zalva who goes through that purification process also has a particular Karban, and a Yoledet, somebody who gave birth, a woman who gave birth to a boy or a girl, depending on a boy or a girl, will be the amount of time that they have to wait before they can bring the Karban, and then they bring a Chatas and an Ola. Okay, there's a Karban where somebody accidentally, this is the classic Karban we all know, it is the Karban Chatas, which is for somebody who does something bishogeg, that means unwillfully or unknowingly did something that the Torah said is an Isur Kares, so they bring a Chatas. And if a person is not sure, im nistapek lo, im asa or lo asa, so that particular sin, a person doesn't know, he brings an asham, and it's called an asham talui. Okay, there are certain averot that a person brings an asham, and it's because he did it. It's not because he doesn't know, and that's called an asham vadai. And an example would, one second, that would be an ayil. He brings a ram as a burnt offering, a karban ola, and a bull as a chatas, and I'm sorry, I misread that. Okay, so that's called an asham vadai. Okay, new thing. One of the unique karbanos that are brought on Yom Kippur is that the Kohen Gadol brings an ayil and a par. The ayil is an ola and the par is a chatas. Okay, that's something that the Kohen Gadol brings, and it has to be for himself, and that's a karban yachid. That's to atone for himself. And then, okay, and that par is called, in the Torah, it's called par Yom Kippur. Okay, and all these karbanos, you know, if you can look at them in the Torah, they're explained. But that's a brief walkthrough. Okay, so now we said, right, we explained that that a karban yachid, a person has a responsibility to bring, unless it's a nedava and something happens, and he also has to bring the nisachim, the attendant nisachim, the yayin and the solas that comes with them. Okay, now, interesting. Okay, the olos, they come from the following. Okay, they don't just come from male animals, they can also come from female animals, and they are brought from sheep and from goats and from cattle, and they can be brought from mature animals or young ones. Okay, and also, when it comes to the ofot, meaning the Torim and the Bnei Yonah, they can come from Zachar and the Keva. Okay. A karban chatas comes from Zacharim and Nekevos, from Gedolim and Ketan. Okay. Now, an Asham only comes from male sheep. Okay. There are some Ashams that have to come from adults, and there are some ashams that come from ketanim. So you see, it's fascinating. All these elements are factors. We don't necessarily have a Mesorah for all this symbolism, but I mean, you could just think about all these different aspects and why they make a difference. I mean, makes a difference. Shlamim are brought from sheep and from goats, from cattle that are male and female, from mature and immature. You cannot bring a bird for a karban shlamim. And now the youngest animal that you could bring has to be 8 days. And it could be until a year old to the day. Okay? And if the year was a leap year, it's considered it doesn't matter. A year is a year, so it's not. It's the leap year is a leap year for the animals age two, and cattle that has to be brought from mature cattle. They can be brought up to 3 years old. The beginning of Masechet Para, which talks about the laws of the Para Aduma. The opening, the first parak is all about when the Torah says a particular age or prescribes a particular animal for a particular carbon, what the ages are and how all the different ages. So if you want to know those halachas, you can find them there in the first parak of Para. Okay, if an animal is too old, you can't bring it. Okay, okay, even though every animal could be brought um, from 8 days and on, that is a b'diavad. Lechatchila, it's best, it's nicest to wait till they're at least 30 days. That's except for the Bechor and the Pesach and the Meiser, that you can bring them even lechatchila from the 8th day and on. Okay. He goes into all the ages, the various ages. Okay, all karbanot tzibur have to be male. They're male animals, and therefore all the karban chatas of the tzibur, I'm sorry, and all the chataot of the tzibur, all the collective offerings that are chataot, they have to be from a goat or from cattle, and you don't bring them from sheep. And olot tzibur are always from sheep and from cattle, and you cannot bring a goat as a karban ola. The ola, it's very interesting. I'm not saying this is emet la'amito, but the ola is one of the symbols of the ola is that it's completely consumed in the fire. And the tzaddikim say that the ola is a skula for tarat machshava. It's when you want to totally, it's like mikvah karban. It's like you want to totally give over yourself, even your machshavot. So like the idea of an ola is that it's total devotion and total being given over. So the it's interesting that a goat is not brought as an ola, and I'm just wondering if goats are not known for their docile character. I actually had two goat shepherds at my table this past Shabbos for lunch, and we talked at length about the difference between goats and sheep. And it's not the first time I had this conversation with goat shepherds. And I want to tell you that we just read in Parshas HaChodesh, we read about the Korban Pesach this past week, right? And it has to be the Korban Pesach is brought min hatzon. Tzon means flock animals, and that means either kvasim or izim. So you can bring your Korban Pesach from a sheep or a goat. Now, the Korban Pesach, there's different ways of thinking about it, but some people, we're familiar with thinking about it in terms of consuming the Avodah Zarah of Paro and Mitzrayim, that they worshipped the keves, and this was a great affront to them, and it was an act of great chutzpah eating their Avodah Zarah. But the Korban Pesach is also meant to symbolize the Bnei Yisrael themselves. And it's kind of like you're celebrating Pesach is our birthday, and the Korban Pesach is birthday cake. And it's appropriate to bring the Korban Pesach from kvasim and izim because both are kosher animals. That means they exhibit positive midos. They're essentially kosher, and they're both flock animals. That means that they both need to imprint on a shepherd. They both require a shepherd to take care of them, and they have a symbiotic relationship with humans. They need humans to survive, and humans rely on them. At the same time, there is a marked difference between the sheep and the goats. The sheep I had a friend once who was a sheep. And there's a he was a shepherd of sheep, and he said he'd never seen something so empty as looking into the eyes of a sheep. And that just means that sheep excel at doing stuff because the flock is doing stuff. And in some ways, that's a very, very holy midah. And the goat is the exact opposite. The goat, you have to have a very devoted shepherd till he becomes a goat shepherd, because everybody describes getting over the hump of actually hating the sheep and I'm sorry, hating the goats and resenting them. The goats give them a hard time. They don't want to listen. They're mischievous, and they're tough, and they have chutzpah, and they have attitude. And after a rapport is made, there's great appreciation for the goat, because the goat also is very resilient. A sheep, if it's giving birth in the field, if a person doesn't get to help the sheep, it's not a guarantee that the animal or the mother, like that, it's going to make it. But a goat takes care of itself. By the time you get there, the goat's fine, and the goat doesn't need you. And it reminds me of what the Mialdos Ibrios told Paro in Shemos, when Paro said, "Hey, maybe you could get there before the baby's born and do a late-term abortion." And they said, "Well, the Jewish women are not like the Egyptian women. By the time we get there, they're already taking care of the baby's born already." The lashon is ki chayotena. They have extra vitality. They're wild. They're in their natural habitat. So the goats are very frustrating on the one hand, and they have an attitude. And we know that the Jews, everybody who's, even if he's a sheep, he'll think he's a goat. Everybody's got their own opinions, and everybody's a yachid. But we're all mamish. We're all connected, like sheep also, to focused on our shepherd, which is Avinu Shebashamayim. So both the goat and the sheep are appropriate ways to talk about the tahara of the midos tovos of Am Yisrael. And here we just mentioned that you never ever have a goat for an ola. And I'm just thinking maybe, and just inviting you also, to, when it comes to these kinds of things about karbanos, when you can come up with maybe your own tamei mitzvos. But over here, maybe it wouldn't truly capture the idea of the ola, which is meant to be total devotion and being consumed or subsumed in godly fire, when the animal is seen as an animal that's known for being an individual and reserving its independence. So maybe that doesn't capture the same feeling and the same primal response. The seir is brought oftentimes, I mean, it has associations with achatas, and specifically with doing avodah zarah. And that might be appropriate too, because maybe there's a part of you that's independent, or that went a little bit too far, that stands out, maybe, that you want to uh, make subservient on the Mizbeach. So just that idea of how you can think about maybe the symbolism of the animal and the carbon, kind of generally is a mahalach that you can develop. I just want to mention, because I just remembered, that there's an idea of smicha. Smicha means that for certain karbanot, um, for example, for a chatas, the person who brings the chatas has to have tshuva, and then he puts his hands on the animal and he says vidui on the animal. The smicha that a person does on a shlamim, he puts his hands on the animal and he says divrei shvach, and he says praise to Hashem. So that's another important part of. Now, smicha is not ma'akiv. If you don't do it, I believe you're supposed to ideally shech the animal right after the smicha. Smicha has to be done immediately before. There's a machloket b'shama and b'shilel if smicha is done for karbonos that are brought on the Yamim Tovim, and I believe Shammai says that you do not do smicha on Yom Tov, and maybe you would do smicha immediately before Yom Tov comes in. But bottom line is, I don't believe smicha is ma'akiv, but it's another important element there that also drives home this relationship between the person who's bringing the korban, and the korban itself. Okay, so there are more types of karbanos. There's every chatas yachid is okay. Chatas yachid is a nekeva. It comes from a female animal, and the kohanim eat it, and it's not brought from cattle, except for three types of chatas. There's a chatas of the nasi. He is the president of the Sanhedrin, and that is a okay. So I'm sorry. These three are exceptions for one more time. Let's see here. Okay. So there are three types of chatos that are exceptional. There's the chatas nasi, which is a goat, and it's eaten, I guess, by him. No, it would be by the Kohanim, and the Chatas Kohen Mashiach. So there's a special Chatas that a Kohen, meaning the Kohen Gadol, if he's anointed, if he became the Kohen Gadol, there's two ways you can become the Kohen Gadol. You can become the Kohen Gadol if you're anointed with oil, or if you put on the first time the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. So a Kohen Gadol that was anointed, if he makes a ruling, a mistaken ruling for an Issachar Kares, then he has to bring a special kind of chatas, and it's a bull, and it's burnt, and it's not eaten. Okay, and the third is the Kohen Gadol brings, like we mentioned, he brings the par, a ox that's burnt on Yom Kippur, and that's called the korban chatas. Okay, all the chataot that are brought from the tzibur are eaten, except for the goat that's brought on Yom Kippur, and all the goats that are brought for serving Avodah Zarah accidentally, and the parhalam davar, meaning those chataot that the Sanhedrin brought or the Kohen brought for mistaken rulings. Those are all eaten. Okay. Okay, a goat that's brought for Avodah Zarah is burnt. Okay, so it turns out the Rambam says that there are 5 different types of karban chatas. Okay, okay, two different types of chatat are brought as a karban yachid, and 3 are brought from the tzibur. Okay, let's look at the Mishnayot. Let's run through a couple of Mishnayot. Okay. So this is the 5th parak of Masechet Zvachim. Ezo mikoman shel Zvachim. Where is the place for Zvachim? Meaning, where is the proper place in the azara to shech the animal? Okay. Kadshe kedashim. The category of karbanos that are called kadshe kedashim, which we said are the chatas and the ola and the asham and the 2 kvasim that are brought on Shavuos, shchitasan batzafam. They have to be shechted in the north. Okay, so now just go over a couple of things. The main mizbeach is called the mizbeach hachutz. That is the mizbeach that everybody thinks of when you imagine the mizbeach. That's outside. That's in the chutzner. That's right outside the azara. You walk inside the Beis HaMikdash, and then you have inside the Heichal, you have the menorah, and you have the shulchan, and you have the mizbeach hazahav, which is the small mizbeach which is used for the ketores, and then you have the inside in the Kodesh HaKodashim, you have the aron behind the paroches. So there's some karbanos that the blood goes on the mizbeach hazav, the mizbeach of ketores, And there's some sprinkling that we're going to mention is even done on the kaporas. Okay, so Kodesh Kodashim, the shechita is done in the north. Now the mizbeach, the main mizbeach, the outside mizbeach, imagine if the ramp is the front, so it's facing, when you're walking up the ramp, the mizbeach is, you're pointed towards the north. Okay, Par v'sayir shel Yom Kippurim, the bull and the goat of Yom Kippur that the Kohen Gadol brings, shchitatan batzafon, it's shechted in the north. V'kibul daman, and accepting the blood, right, that comes out by the shchita, b'kli sharet, in a sanctified vessel, batzafon, in the north. V'daman, and its blood, ta'un hazayal ben habadim, you have to sprinkle the blood on between the two staves of the aron in the Kodesh HaKodashim, ve'ala parochet, and on the parochet that separates between the Kodesh Kodashim and the Kodesh, ve'al mizbach hazav, and it also gets sprinkling on the golden mizbeach haktoret. Okay, so it would be like this. The Kohen would sprinkle. He would go by the Kodesh HaKodashim, and he would sprinkle 1 in an upwards motion and 7 downwards, and he would do that again on the paroches, and then he would touch the 4 corners of the Mizbeach HaKtoris. Each one would get a sprinkling, and he would sprinkle 7 times down the side of the Mizbeach. Okay? Matana achat mehen makevet. If you mess up any of this, it's no good. Meaning one missing or messing up any of the blood sprinklings would invalidate it. Shiarei hadam, whatever's left of the blood, hayashofech hayesod maravi, they would pour down on the western yesod. That means the base of the mizbeach structure. Shal mizbeach achitza, from the outer mizbeach. In lo natan, if they didn't, lo ikev, it doesn't matter. Okay, let's do another one. Parim hanisrafim, the sacrifices of bulls that are burnt. What are they? We said they're the par that the Kohen who's anointed with oil brings for mistaken ruling, and the ox that's burnt as a chatas for the mistaken ruling of the Sanhedrin on any mitzvah that's a Issachari's. Usi'irim hanisrafim, and burnt goats. What are burnt goats? Those are for a ruling, accidental ruling from Sanhedrin to serve Avodah Zarah. Shchitatam batzafon, they are slaughtered in the north. V'kibul daman b'chli sharet batzafon, and their blood is accepted in a sanctified vessel in the north. V'daman ta'un hazayal haparochet, and you have to sprinkle the blood 7 times on the parochet, the curtain between the Kodesh HaKodashim and the Kodesh. Ve'al mizbach hazav, and each corner of the Mizbeach HaKtoret got 1 sprinkle of blood. Matana achat me'an makevet, 1 sprinkling in the wrong place messes it up. She'arei hadam, whatever's left of the blood, hayashofech hayesod maravi, would be poured on the base, on the western side, shal Mizbeach hachitzan, from the outer Mizbeach. In lo natan, if he doesn't bring lo ikev, it doesn't matter. Elu ve'elu, all the actual animals themselves from all these karbanot, nisrafim beveit hadashin, were burnt in the Beit Hadeshan, which is this place where they would burn everything and dispose of the ashes of all the sacrifices right outside the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, so Mishnah Gimel, Chatot HaTzibur v'Hayachid, Karbane Chataot that are brought either on behalf of the Tzibur or the individual. Elohim Chatot HaTzibur, the following are the collective types of Karbanot. Si'irei Rashi Chadashim, there is something called the goats that are brought on Rosh Chodesh. It's a karban chatas, and I'm sure you know the beautiful medrash that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, bring it for me, why is it a karban chatas? So Hashem says He wants kapara on behalf of Hashem for being memayed the areach, for the levana, for making the levana small. That is the chatas that's brought from the tzibur on Rosh Chodesh, vishal moados, and the karbanos chatas that are brought to atone on Yomim Tovim, shchitasam batzafa, and they're shechted in the north, v'kibul daman b'klei sharas betzafan, and their blood is accepted with a sanctified vessel in the north, v'daman ton arba matanot arba kranot, and the blood needs to be placed on the 4 corners of the main mizbeach. Ketzad, what's the procedure? Allah bakevesh. So the Kohen who has the blood, he goes up halfway up the ramp, ufana lasovev, and he turns to his right side. So he's on the south, and he turns to the right side. That's going to be on the west. I'm sorry, on the east. And there's a little lip that goes around halfway around the Mizbeach, around the perimeter. It's like a ledge called the Sovev that goes around. Ufana leSovev. He turns to the Sovev. Ubalo lekerem dromit mizrachet. And he arrives at the first corner of the Mizbeach he's going to arrive at is the southeastern corner. So, and he puts Mizrachit Tzafonit, and then he'll make his way to the corner of the northeastern corner, and then Tzfonit Ma'aravit, the northwestern corner, and then Ma'aravit Dromit. So he circles around, and that's how he does. He puts blood on each one of the corners. Okay, Shiari Hadam, the leftover blood, Dromi, he would pour it down on the base, on the side of the south. So now we're talking about the laws of eating. So whatever is meant to be eaten from that carbon for the Kohanim has to be eaten min haklayim. That means within the walls of the chatzar of the Beit HaMikdash. L'zichrei kahuna, it can only be eaten by males, male Kohanim. B'chol machal, they can eat it with any food that they want as long as it's tahar. Liyom v'layla, they have a day and a night, ad chatzos, until midnight. Okay? Now, this is going to be the formula for all subsequent Mishnayot. They're going to tell you not only where they have to be shechted, where their blood is placed, who gets to eat it, and how it can be eaten, and how long they have to eat it. So let's just do another Mishnah, and then you'll be released. Okay, ha'olah. A korban olah obviously is not eaten. It is in the category of kache kedasha. Its shchita is in the north. Its blood is accepted in a sanctified vessel in the north. Its blood gets 2 matanot, which are 4. It gets 2, which is 4. I'm going to explain that in a second. And it bituna hefshit, it requires that it be skinned, vinituach, and it has to be chopped up, v'kalil li'ishim, and it has to be completely put on the fire and burnt. Okay, so now when the Mishnah says two gifts of blood, which are 4, that means that they would only put on the Mizbeach, they would put 2 corners. They would put, let's say, they would put 1 drop of blood where 2 corners meet, and it would count for both sides, but it would just be one for each side. So they would kind of smear over like 2 walls of the Mizbeach on one side, and then 2 walls of the other side. Okay. Zimchei Shalmei Tzibur v'Hashamos, these are the Zvachim that are Shalmei Tzibur, they are collective Karban Shlamim and Hashamot. Elu hein Hashamot. What are examples of a Karban Asham? Asham Gezelot, Asham Mi'ilot, Asham Shivcha Charufa, Asham Nazir, Asham Etzor. These are an Asham for, let's say, stealing something and then swearing that b'shuas hapikadon, that you didn't steal. So then you have to bring an asham. Asham mi'ila is if you benefited from hektish. You have to bring a special karba. Asham shivcha charufa, somebody who was with a shivcha, somebody who that she was an Eved Cananis. She was a slave to a Jewish family, and she was half freed, so she has half the din of a Yisraelis and half the din of a Shivcha. If somebody was intimate with her, he has to bring a special carbon called an Asham. There's the Asham that a Nazir brings, and an Asham that a Mitzora brings. Then there's an Asham Tali, and all these Ashamos, they are shechted in the north, and their blood is accepted with a sanctified vessel in the north. And you put 2 matanos, which are 4, and they have to be eaten within the klayim, within the Beit HaMikdash compound. 2 males from the kohuna, they could be eaten with any type of food for 1 day and 1 night until chatzos. Okay, Yehi Ratzon, L'fnei Avinu Shabashamayim, Sheyabanu Beit HaMikdash b'mheira v'yameinu, v'sencha kenu v'sorasecha, v'sham na'avodcha b'yira, k'mei olam u'chshanim kadmanios. We should merit soon, and I hope, Mitzvah Hashem, when we have the opportunity, maybe we can meet and talk about how all of this is practical in our everyday tefillah. Okay. Wishing everybody Besurot Tovot, Yeshuot, and a wonderful Pesach.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Amen to all your brachas.
Thank you
That was
so
a beautiful
much. Thank
shiur.
you. It was very good. Thank you.
Okay. I know it's a lot of information and it's very